4 minutes of sheer terror, plummeting through the dark Atlantic. How could the most advanced, the supposedly unsinkable airliner of its time, just vanish without a single distress call? That evening, Captain Marc Dubois and pilots David Robert and Pierre-Cédric Bonin departed from sunny Rio. They trusted this machine with their lives, yet found themselves in a fatal trap of their own making. Why did the experienced crew ignore blaring alarms and, with their own hands, pull the plane into the abyss, while the aircraft's systems begged them to stop? The answer to that is more terrifying than any mechanical failure. Rio de Janeiro greets the crew with deceptive warmth and a laid-back atmosphere. The calendar reads late May. The crew arrives on the 28th, receiving a luxurious gift: 3 days on the ground, far from the European bustle. For the first officer, 32-year-old Pierre-Cédric Bonin, it's more than just work. He's flown here with his wife. For them, it's a mini vacation, strolls along the waterfront, romantic dinners. But it's right here, under the bright Brazilian sun, that an invisible yet dangerous factor begins its countdown. No one monitors how much a pilot truly rests before a flight that will demand their absolute peak concentration. By the evening of May 31st, the crew gathers for their briefing. Departure is scheduled for 22:09 Universal Time. Experienced aviators know what that means. They must cross the Atlantic during the worst time of the day, the circadian low. It's a biological pit, when the body craves deep sleep, reactions slow, and the mind rebels against complex tasks. To mitigate the risk, the cockpit crew is reinforced. There will be 3 of them, allowing for controlled rest periods right there in the sky. The lineup in the cockpit looks impressive on paper, but hides a subtle imbalance. The captain, 58-year-old Marc Dubois, is a true veteran. Behind him is a colossal 11,000 hours of flight time. He is calm and self-assured. Flying alongside him is Bonin, the same one who spent the weekend with his wife. He's the youngest and least experienced of this trio. On this type of aircraft, he's logged only 800 hours, which by the standards of major airlines is very little. But there's a safety net: the third pilot, 37-year-old David Robert. The paradox is that this very backup pilot knows the specifics of this particular aircraft model better than anyone, even better than the captain. 4,500 hours. That's how long he's spent at the controls of this exact machine. It seems that with such a crew, any system failure would be doomed to fail. The pre-flight preparations proceed as usual. Over 70 tons of kerosene are pumped into the tanks, a huge mass of fuel for the long journey home. The weather briefing on the pilot's table looks ambiguous. In the departure zone, the weather is excellent. Rio sees them off under clear skies. However, the route charts already hint at challenges ahead. Further on, in the equatorial zone where the winds of both hemispheres meet, nature is preparing a difficult welcome for them. But for now, these are just standard notations on paper. The crew takes their seats, preparing for another night shift, unaware that the familiar routine is about to end. This steel giant seems utterly invulnerable. On the tarmac stands a practically brand new airliner, manufactured in 2005, a masterpiece of engineering, packed with electronics that seem capable of flying better than any human. But deep within its structure lies a tiny, almost primitive component, capable of bringing all this power to its knees. We're talking about the pitot tubes. Imagine little metal straws sticking out from the nose of the plane into the wind. They eagerly gulp the oncoming air to tell the computers the most crucial thing: airspeed. These sensors are equipped with automatic heating, which is supposed to instantly melt any ice. That's what the manual says. But statistics are a stubborn and frightening thing. Over the past 2 years, investigators and technicians have been tracking a disturbing anomaly: 9 separate instances where ice crystals have blocked the tubes on similar aircraft. 9 times, pilots have suddenly gone blind in the sky, losing all speed readings. The manufacturer is aware of the issue. Airbus even issued a special bulletin, a polite recommendation to replace the old probes with more reliable ones. But in the world of aviation, where every step is governed by rules, a recommendation is not an order. Regulators deem such failures rare and temporary, so there's no sense of urgency. This is where fate's cruelest irony comes into play. For this specific airframe, now sitting under Brazilian skies, the new, safer sensors are already sitting in a warehouse. The replacement is scheduled for immediately after its return to Paris. Their salvation awaits at their destination, a place they still have to reach. The situation is made worse by the human factor, baked into their training. The crew certainly knows how to respond to failed airspeed indicators, but they were only ever trained to handle it at low altitudes, during takeoff or landing. No one ever ran them through a simulator with this problem at cruising altitude, in the thin air of the stratosphere, where the physics of flight change completely. Furthermore, their muscle memory is wired to outdated procedures. For years, pilots have been taught, if the plane starts to fall, if it stalls, push the throttles to full and pull back on the stick to maintain altitude at all costs. This reflex saves lives near the ground, but at an altitude of 10 kilometers, it's deadly. Up there, in the thin air, pitching the nose up completely kills lift. The system is primed to fail, and the people in the cockpit are trained to react as instinct demands, not as high-altitude aerodynamics requires. They leave the safe world of human communication and enter a zone of absolute radio silence. The airliner occupies flight level 350. That's roughly 10.5 kilometers above the ocean surface. The lights of the Brazilian coast dissolve into the inky darkness behind them, and the aircraft's green blip vanishes forever from ground radar screens. Now, they're alone over the abyss. At this critical moment, the crew tries to establish contact via the satellite-based ADS-C system, a kind of digital tether meant to relay their coordinates to air traffic control. But the attempt fails. The system goes offline. A fatal coincidence, a simple bureaucratic error in the flight plan, leaves the controllers in Senegal blind. They expect the flight in their sector, but they don't know its precise entry time or location. The massive 200-ton airliner becomes a ghost, and ahead, Poteau Noir is already waiting, the intertropical convergence zone. It's the planet's giant weather kitchen, where the trade winds of the northern and southern hemispheres collide head-on. This is where the thunderstorm monsters are born, cumulonimbus towers reaching up to 60,000 feet. Flying over them is impossible. The Airbus simply can't climb that high. They have to go around. But here, nature sets its craftiest trap. The aircraft's onboard radar is tuned to see liquid water. It bounces signals off raindrops, painting red danger zones on the screen. Yet the storm they're entering isn't made of water, but of billions of dry ice crystals. To the radar, these icy walls are almost transparent. The crew looks at their displays and sees clear air, or just faint green patches, while in reality they're racing straight into the core of a powerful convective storm. The pilots notice increasing turbulence, but dismiss it as routine for tropical flights. They discuss the outside air temperature, make slight course adjustments to skirt minor returns, but execute no sharp evasive maneuvers. Trust in their technology lulls them into complacency. Captain Marc Dubois decides the situation is normal. He gets up from the left seat. It's time for his rest break. The most seasoned pilot leaves the cockpit in the hands of two first officers and retreats to a cramped rest area behind the flight deck, pulling the curtain closed behind him. Suddenly, the cockpit windshield silently erupts with violet lightning. These are St. Elmo's fires, a mesmerizing dance of static electricity that screams one thing. The air outside is charged with energy and extremely unstable. The time is 01:46. The airliner begins to shake like a cart on cobblestones. The turbulence builds, and Captain Dubois knows a peaceful rest isn't going to happen. He calls his relief pilot, David Robert, to the cockpit a little ahead of schedule. A brief but fateful meeting takes place inside the flight deck. Dubois points to the instruments. The outside air temperature is above normal. It's a physical dead end. Warm air is less dense. The wings lack lift, and the engines lack thrust. The heavy, fully fueled airliner simply cannot climb higher to get above the clouds. "We cannot gain altitude," the captain states. But as he leaves, he makes a critical error in communication. He does not leave a clear plan of action in case the shaking turns into a storm. There is no phrase like, "If it gets worse, turn back." He relies on the assumption that his guys will handle it themselves. At 01:59, the rest area curtain is drawn. Captain Dubois puts on his sleep mask, leaving the bridge. And here, the safety architecture collapses. Look at the balance of power. Control of the aircraft is in the hands of Pierre-Cédric Bonin, seated on the right. Remember, he's the youngest member of the crew, the little brother in this family of pilots. Right now, he is the pilot flying. On the left, in the captain's seat, sits David Robert. Despite his vast experience on this type of aircraft, at this moment, he is merely an observer. He does not assume a leadership role, instead treating the situation as a routine shift change. He even leans his seat back slightly, getting comfortable. Two first officers are now alone in the cockpit. Without a senior mentor, without clear instructions, and with a massive wall of thunderstorms directly ahead. Suddenly, the scent of a storm fills the cockpit. This isn't a metaphor, it's a physical sensation. A sharp electric aroma of ozone hangs in the air, like a short circuit happened somewhere nearby. David Robert, seated on the left, no longer looks relaxed. He leans toward the navigation display and cranks the radar settings to maximum, trying to cut through the interference. The screen finally admits what it was hiding. Powerful storm cells are rising dead ahead. The crew decides to deviate. The airliner makes a smooth turn, just 12 degrees to the left. It feels like an evasive maneuver, but in reality, they are merely shifting position inside a giant trap. At 2:08, the soundscape of their world changes instantly. The steady hum of flight is replaced by an aggressive noise, like gravel pelting a tin roof. It's a dreadful sound, impossible to escape. The plane smashes into a wall of ice shards and supercooled water. The engines, those giant lungs of the aircraft, begin to choke. They are ingesting millions of ice crystals every second. Inside the compressors, the ice melts and evaporates, creating excessive moisture, while the air conditioning system pulls in the sharp smell of ozone from the electrical discharges outside. The temperature in the cockpit starts to climb. The atmosphere becomes stifling, tense. Pierre-Cédric Bonin, whose hands are on the side stick, reacts by the book. He sees the turbulence intensifying and reduces speed to 0.8 Mach. This is the so-called turbulence penetration speed, a regime meant to soften the blows from the elements on the airframe. He is doing everything right. But he cannot see the main enemy. A silent act of sabotage is happening outside. Those very ice crystals drumming against the fuselage are attacking its most vulnerable spot: the pitot tubes. The automatic heating for the sensors is working at its limit, trying to melt the accumulating ice, but the stream of crystals is far too dense. Nature triumphs over technology. An ice plug completely seals the pitot tube inlets. From this moment on, the airliner's computer loses its ability to sense the airflow. The plane is flying blind, though the pilots don't yet know it. The silence in the cockpit is shattered by the sound of a cavalry charge. At 2 hours, 10 minutes, and 5 seconds, the peaceful flight is over. The sharp, piercing cavalry charge stall, warning blares in their ears, making their hearts leap into their throats. This is the signal of the flight computer's complete surrender. Due to the ice-plugged pitot tubes, it sees an absurd picture. The airliner's speed instantly plummets to 60 knots. To the system, it appears as if the plane, flying at nearly the speed of sound, has suddenly stopped in mid-air. The electronic brain of the Airbus cannot solve this problem and shuts down. In 1 second, the autopilot disengages. The autothrust disconnects. The aircraft transitions into a degraded control mode known as alternate law 2. This is the critical moment the pilots are still unaware of. The invisible safety net that had protected them from mistakes for years is gone. There is no more stall protection, no smart limiters. Now, this 200-ton giant is entirely at the mercy of human hands. Pierre-Cédric Bonin reacts instantly, but reflexively. "I have control!" he shouts, yelling over the siren's wail, and grabs his side stick. He is gripped by fright. His adrenaline is off the charts. But he fails to consider that in this alternate law mode, roll control becomes direct and incredibly sensitive. The slightest hand movement elicits a sharp response from the machine. Turbulence causes the airliner to bank to the right. Bonin tries to level the wings, but his input is too abrupt. The plane is thrown to the left. The pilot yanks the stick back. The plane rolls right again. A dangerous oscillation begins. Bonin fights the roll. His movements are wide and frantic. And here, in the chaos of the struggle for the horizon, occurs a fateful movement that nobody notices. Trying to keep the plane level, the pilot's hand involuntarily pulls back on the side stick. Instead of lowering the nose to gain speed, he pitches it upward, beginning to climb at the most dangerous possible moment. Gravity pins the pilots into their seats with incredible force. The sensation is deceptively reassuring. It feels like the machine is powerfully surging upward, conquering the elements, but in reality, it's the beginning of the end. Pierre-Cédric Bonin continues to pull the stick back, and the airliner's nose pitches up to a critical 11 degrees. The heavy jet performs a maneuver worthy of a lightweight fighter, not a passenger plane, the so-called zoom climb. The vertical speed shoots up to a crazy 7,000 feet per minute. The airliner is literally leaping into the stratosphere, punching through the ceiling of its flight level. But this burst comes at a terrible price. In aviation, nothing is free. The plane is rapidly trading its kinetic energy, that is, its speed, for altitude. It's like a car, clutch disengaged, coasting up a steep hill on momentum alone. The higher it goes, the slower it moves. The engines roar at takeoff power, but even their might isn't enough to compensate for the speed loss at such a steep pitch. Amid the chaos of sounds, a new, soul-chilling alarm cuts through the cockpit. "Stall!" The sharp synthetic voice warning of an aerodynamic stall. It's the most critical warning in aviation, but the pilots ignore it. Why? Perhaps, under extreme stress, their brains simply filter it out as background noise. Or perhaps they just don't believe their ears, because their eyes are telling a different story. Right in front of them, on the screens, the treacherous flight director command bars are lit up. These digital guides are supposed to show the correct path, but now, relying on faulty data, they display an absurd command. Climb. The electronics are lying, leading the crew into a trap. The relief pilot, David Robert, seated on the left, stares at the instruments in confusion. He makes a critical judgment error. He doesn't realize the plane is in alternate law mode. He still believes the smart Airbus automation won't let the airliner stall, that the invisible safety net is still there. But the net is gone. They are now alone with the merciless laws of aerodynamics. Imagine trying to solve a complex mathematical equation while 10 people are screaming different numbers in your ears simultaneously. That's the kind of hell the cockpit has become. The silence is shattered by a cacophony. The ECAM displays light up with a cascade of 10 different failure messages. The red master warning light pulses like a strobe at a disco, blinding and disorienting. David Robert, who is supposed to monitor the instruments, tries to read this endless list of faults, but his voice falters. He sees individual symptoms: autopilot failure, problems with the rudders, a flight control system failure. But amidst this information noise, they miss the core problem itself. The crew is drowning in a data stream, losing the most crucial thing: an understanding of where they are and what the plane is doing. At this moment, Pierre-Cédric Bonin takes an action that, on the ground, would have saved their lives, but up here, it becomes a trap. He pushes the engine thrust levers all the way forward, into the toga mode. The turbines roar, delivering maximum thrust. But at 36,000 feet, physics works differently. Due to the thin air, this powerful surge doesn't propel the plane forward. Instead, because the engines are mounted under the wings, the thrust vector simply pitches the airliner's nose up even higher. They aren't gaining speed. It is rearing up on its hind legs. Robert finally tears his eyes away from the fault list and sees the numbers running on the altimeter. He realizes they are climbing, bleeding away their remaining energy. "Watch the speed! Go down!" he shouts at his partner, trying to be heard over the noise. "Okay, Okay, I'm descending, Bonin responds. He does push the side stick forward slightly. The nose of the aircraft dips slightly. The steep climb begins to slow, but it's nowhere near enough. It's a half measure, a timid attempt when decisive action is required. Momentum keeps hauling the heavy machine upward. The plane streaks past 37,000 feet. They reach the very top of their arc, but their kinetic energy is spent. The airliner hangs in the black sky, helpless and too slow to fly. The air treacherously breaks away from the wings, and the giant jet effectively turns to stone. The time is 2 hours, 10 minutes, and 57 seconds. The plane exceeds the critical angle of attack, and the physics of flight break down. The fuselage is hammered by a heavy shudder. This is buffeting. This isn't turbulence. This is the agony of aerodynamics. The airflow no longer moves smoothly over the wings, but shreds into chaos, slamming into the tail and fuselage like the plane is driving over a washboard. At this moment, auditory hell reigns in the cockpit. The stall warning, which until now had only been clearing its throat, blares at full volume. A mechanical female voice screams, "Stall! Stall!" without pause. This scream will echo in the pilot's ears for an endless 45 seconds, yet paradoxically, they seem not to hear it. A brain in panic mode blocks this channel of perception. Pierre-Cédric Bonin, whose hand is clenched on the side stick, acts on reflex, like a robot executing an old program. He keeps pulling back on the stick and holds the engines at takeoff thrust, toga. He was trained for this for years. If the plane is sinking near the ground or hits wind shear, you pull the nose up and add power. It's a takeoff survival instinct. But here, in the stratosphere, that reflex becomes a death sentence. By raising the nose, he only drives the plane deeper into the stall, finally killing all lift. The airliner reaches its tragic peak, an altitude of 37,924 feet. It is the apex of the parabola. Inertia ends. The 200-ton machine hangs for an instant, then begins its relentless fall toward the ocean. The instruments go haywire, vibration shakes the floor, the alarm screams itself hoarse warning of death. But the most terrifying thing happens: informational blindness. Throughout this entire time, not once does either pilot utter the words "stall" out loud. They are fighting the machine, but they never even name their killer. The aircraft's safety system falls silent precisely when the disaster becomes inevitable. The irony of the moment is absolutely devastating. The ice plugs in the pitot tubes are finally melting. The warmer layers of atmosphere are doing their job. The sensors come back to life, and real numbers appear on the screens. 183 knots. It would seem the systems are back online, giving the crew a chance at survival. But this data is now useless. Gravity has decisively seized the initiative. The airliner is no longer flying forward, slicing through the air with its nose. It is falling downward, like a dry autumn leaf. Its nose is pitched up at a monstrous 40 degrees. Imagine a giant building falling from the sky not vertically, but flat, exposing its metallic belly to the oncoming airflow. And here occurs a technical paradox that would later make investigators hold their heads in their hands. Since the plane is falling almost vertically, the air strikes the fuselage from below, not from the front. Its horizontal speed drops below the threshold of 60 knots. The onboard computer, following its rigid programming, decides that flying this slowly is physically impossible. It interprets this data as yet another sensor failure and simply filters it out. Following this false logic, the computer forcibly disables the stall alarm. An ominous, deafening silence falls over the cockpit. The insistent shriek of "stall, stall" stops. This creates a false sense in the pilots that the situation is improving. They genuinely believe that if the alarm has gone silent, it means they have recovered the aircraft. In reality, the silence means only one thing. They have fallen into a stall so deep that even the electronics refuses to believe what is happening. Pierre-Cédric Bonin, still gripping the yoke with the nose held high, utters a sentence filled with tragic misunderstanding. "I have the feeling we are at an insane speed." His senses are deceived by the roar of wind battering them from below with unbelievable force. He believes the airliner is surging forward, accelerating, when in reality they are simply sinking through the air. And it is at this very second, after an endless minute and a half of chaos, that the cockpit door flies open. Captain Marc Dubois bursts into the flight deck. He sees his bewildered colleagues, the insane pitch attitude, and hears that deceptive silence. The man in charge is back in his seat. But Marc Dubois has not entered a cockpit. He has stepped into a surreal nightmare where the laws of logic are turned inside out. The experienced captain's eyes dart across the instruments, refusing to believe what they see. The altimeter is unwinding downward, spinning wildly like a broken clock, counting down their fall toward the ocean. The artificial horizon shows the nose pitched up toward the stars, yet the vertical speed indicator is screaming about a descent. The cockpit shakes violently. Outside the windows there is only darkness. Dubois, just awakened and still grasping the situation, asks a simple, terrifying question. What are you doing?" "We've lost control of the airplane," comes the panicked reply from the darkness. "We don't understand any of this." The tragedy is that Dubois missed the opening act. He didn't see how, a minute ago, Bonin pointed the nose to the sky, executing that fatal zoom climb. The captain sees only the finale, a machine in freefall. He tries to analyze the situation from scratch, but there is no time for thought. And then comes the most monstrous psychological trick the machinery can play. Bonin, the pilot flying from the right seat, makes a timid attempt to correct their situation. He gently pushes the nose down, easing the control column forward. It is the only correct move. The airflow begins to smooth over the wings properly, and the airspeed on the pitot tubes climbs back above 60 knots. The computer comes to its senses, sees the plane is still in a critical state, and triggers the stall alarm again. "Stall! Stall!" the speaker blares once more. A wild, conditioned reflex kicks in. The pilot does the right thing, pushes the nose down, and the plane punishes him with a piercing alarm shriek. The pilot gets scared, instinctively pulls the yoke back, stopping the nose from dropping. The speed falls below the sensitivity threshold again. The computer considers the data an error and goes silent. A blissful quiet fills the cockpit. The crew is caught in a devilish feedback loop. The pilot's logic shatters completely. They start to believe that the saving silence comes when they pull the yoke toward themselves. The captain stands behind the seats, trying to shout over the chaos. But even his vast experience is powerless against this trap, where salvation sounds like death, and approaching the water feels like calm. "We have a crazy speed." This thought pulses in the pilot's mind, completely pushing out reality. Pierre-Cédric Bonin becomes a hostage to a deadly illusion. The roar of the air outside is so deafening it seems the airliner has broken the sound barrier and is racing toward the earth like a rocket. The pilot is sure. To survive, he must slow down. In a panicked impulse, his hand reaches for the speed brake lever. The situation reaches absolute absurdity. A falling stone tries to deploy a parachute that burned up long ago. If he deploys the spoilers now, they will completely destroy the pathetic remnants of lift. Fortunately, his colleagues notice this insane move in time. "Don't do that!" A shout in the cockpit stops his hand a millimeter from the lever, but the misconception itself doesn't go anywhere. At this moment, the numbers on the instruments tell a story that chills the blood. The airliner is plunging through the atmosphere at a rate of 10 to 15,000 feet per minute. For comparison, a normal landing approach is just 700 feet per minute. They're falling 20 times faster, like an elevator with its cables cut. Every second, the ocean gets 50 meters closer. But the crew's focus isn't on their altitude, it's on the horizon. An airplane falling flat becomes unstable. It starts rocking from wing to wing. It's like a dry leaf falling, a roll to the left, a sharp jerk to the right. Bonin is fighting the side stick furiously, trying to keep the wings level. This fight for the horizon becomes a red flag for them, a distracting maneuver orchestrated by death itself. Captain Dubois, standing behind the pilots, also falls into this trap of attention. He sees the rolls and starts giving advice. "Wings level, watch the bank." He's working like a driving instructor, helping a student keep the wheel straight, not noticing the car is already hurtling toward a cliff. The entire crew is looking at the artificial horizon, but no one, absolutely no one, is looking at the most critical indicator. The angle of attack is frozen at 40 degrees. The massive airliner is falling belly first, but the people inside believe they are in a nose-down dive. 10,000 feet. Usually, from this altitude, skydivers step into the void for fun, but for the crew of Flight 447, it's the threshold where the final countdown begins. Through the layers of cloud, they can already make out the black expanse of the ocean. David Robert, seated on the left, finally realizes the fall hasn't stopped. He decides to act, trying to wrestle the airliner from death's grip. He barks sharply, "I have control," and decisively pushes his side stick forward to lower the nose and give the machine back its lift. It's the only correct move in the last 3 minutes. But a drama hidden from view plays out in the cockpit. Pierre-Cédric, gripped by tunnel vision fear, doesn't let go. He keeps pulling his stick back, straining with all his might to raise an airplane that's already pointed at the sky. Through the headphones comes the dry, lifeless voice of the synthesizer. Dual input. This is one of the most treacherous aspects of flying a modern airliner under stress. Unlike old planes, where the control columns are mechanically linked and a pilot can physically feel the other's input, the side sticks in an Airbus operate independently. The computer receives 2 opposing commands. One pilot is screaming, "Down to the machine," the other, "Up." The electronic brain, not knowing which one to obey, simply adds these signals together. A plus and a minus gives you 0. The elevators freeze in a neutral position, and the plane continues to fall flat, ignoring the desperate recovery attempts. The chaos in communication reaches its peak. Robert, trying to take control, shouts in the heat of the moment, "Climb!" but immediately realizes his mistake. They are already falling. Words get tangled, commands contradict actions. Instead of uniting against the situation, the 2 pilots are unintentionally fighting each other. Precious seconds that could have turned the fall into a glide are wasted. The airliner is racing toward the water, while in the cockpit, 2 pairs of hands are pulling the controls in opposite directions, canceling out the last chance for survival. "But I was pulling back the whole time." This phrase, thrown out by Pierre-Cédric, echoes in the cockpit louder than any alarm. In this moment, on the brink of disaster, a terrifying realization dawns. That single sentence instantly pieces the disjointed puzzle into a complete picture. For Captain Marc Dubois and First Officer David Robert, the world turns upside down. They suddenly understand why the plane is falling, why the engines can't pull it up, and why they couldn't figure out the aircraft's behavior for so long. All this time, while they were looking for the cause in broken instruments or the weather, their colleague's hand was simply pulling his side stick back, holding the aircraft's nose pitched up. Fearing a stall, he had been provoking it all along. The captain's reaction is instant and visceral. "No, no, don't climb!" shouts Dubois. His voice is no longer that of an instructor giving advice, but the desperation of a man seeing a wall in front of his car's hood. David Robert, who had finally found the key, acts decisively. He demands control and shoves his control stick forward with all his might, pushing it away from him. Now, with his partner understanding the mistake and no longer resisting, the computer obeys. The airliner's nose begins to drop. The angle of attack decreases, and the airflow finally starts moving correctly over the wings. The indicated airspeed begins to rise, the data becomes reliable, and the piercing shriek of the stall warning sounds again. It sounds like mockery, but it's actually a sign the plane has started flying, not falling. The physics of flight are restored. But there is one relentless factor that cannot be undone: altitude. While they were fighting illusions and each other, the ocean has become terrifyingly close. The altimeter reads only 4,000 feet. At their current rate of descent, that's less than 30 seconds of life left. They began saving the plane when there was already too little air beneath the keel for maneuver. The crew is doing everything right, but the math has already delivered its verdict. The ground proximity warning system pronounces the final death sentence. At 2,500 feet, the radio altimeter feels the ocean surface, and the most terrifying sound for any pilot fills the cockpit. The mechanical voice of the GPWS, the ground proximity warning system, begins screaming hysterically, "Sink rate! Pull up!" And here, the human psyche finally loses to stress. They had just understood that to recover, they needed to push the nose down. But the survival instinct, goaded by the command, "Pull up," proves stronger than reason. The pilot's hands reflexively pull back. This is the final movement that takes away the airliner's last remaining chance of pulling out of the dive. In the final seconds, the first officer makes a desperate attempt to seize control. He presses the red priority override button on his side stick, desperately trying to disable his co-pilot's controls. But time has run out. From the cockpit comes the utterly disbelieving, horrified voice of Pierre-Cédric: "We're going to crash. This can't be happening." These are the last words the black box hears. Reality collapses into a single point. At 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 28 seconds, the recording stops. The massive airliner meets the surface of the Atlantic. The physics of the impact are monstrous. The plane hits the water not nose first, as in a classic dive, but almost flat, with the tail slightly angled down. Its horizontal speed is just 107 knots, like a small light aircraft, but its vertical rate of descent is utterly off the scale, nearly 11,000 feet per minute. At that speed, water loses its liquid properties and becomes as solid as concrete. The impact lasts less than a second. The G-forces are instantaneous and fatal for everyone on board. The robust fuselage, engineered for decades of flight, cannot withstand this colossal pressure and instantly fragments. The airliner literally shatters into thousands of pieces, ending its journey in the complete darkness of an equatorial night, leaving behind only silence and patches of kerosene on the black waves. The sun rises over the Atlantic, illuminating an empty ocean, but on land, no one even suspects what has happened. In the control centers of Senegal and Brazil, a routine calm prevails, a calm that will soon give way to icy horror. Due to that very radio blind spot and bureaucratic misalignments, the flight's disappearance isn't noticed for several hours. The ghost plane is expected in Paris, its blip is searched for on screens, but the airwaves are silent. The search operation begins with a delay. It takes 2 full days before rescuers find the first fragments of the airliner, adrift in the waves. But the key witnesses, the black boxes, descend to the bottom, into an abyss 4 kilometers deep. The ocean guards its secret for an incredibly long time. It would take 4 separate search expeditions, millions of dollars, and 2 full years of deep-sea robot operations to finally bring the flight recorders to the surface. When investigators finally crack the data, what they discover sends a shockwave through the entire world of aviation. They expect to find traces of terrorism or catastrophic structural failure, but the truth proves far more tragic. The airliner was mechanically sound. Its engines were running. Its wings were intact. This perfect machine wasn't destroyed by a technical failure, but by the actions of its pilots, who had lost their bearings. The Commission's report reads like an indictment of an old training system. It reveals the pilots were simply never prepared for such a scenario. They were taught to recover from a stall at low altitude, but no one ever explained how a heavy aircraft behaves in the thin air of the stratosphere. They ignored the stall warning, believing it to be false. They fought each other on the controls because they couldn't see or hear what the other was doing. This catastrophe rewrote the rules of flight. New protocols were written in blood and inscribed into training manuals. In the wake of Flight 447, the entire philosophy of pilot training changed worldwide. Mandatory UPRT, upset prevention and recovery training, was introduced. Now, pilots are taught to trust their instruments over their own senses and to clearly verbalize every action. The procedure for memory items during a stall became sacred. Nose down first, then think about power. The loss of 228 people became the terrible price paid to make every flight today just a little bit safer.